to meet these changes. You see, when the Lakefield Cemetery was founded in 1865, at that point in time, no one could really imagine what Canada was like today. Highway 507 was probably just a dirt road, and the main mode of transportation was horse and buggy or horse and carriage. And this is why the cemetery roads and the gates are so narrow. It was 90 years before there was even hydro in the area. 9 years before the village of Lakefield was incorporated. The village of Lakefield was incorporated in 1874. There was people that were here before that time. The Christ Church, Anglican Church in Lakefield, it says Durrell. That's because this area was considered part of Durrell, and then as it expanded, it became known as Lakefield. So in 1865, that is when the Lakefield Cemetery started. That was actually 2 years before Confederation, before Canada was a country. Before that time, it was just a province. And it was 40 years before the lift locks were completed. If you've ever been out to the museum, had a look at the lift locks, how they were made in 1904, dug by hand, the cement mixed by hand and put on carts. And they had to mix it sloppy because as the carts went, they would jiggle and cause the cement to mix. The pictures are you just imagine how they're able to do that with the technology that they had. What I've done as well is I brought some of the early records from 1865 with me. That includes our log registry, our burial registry, and some of the early handwritten accounts. And it's really by going through these records that I was able to put together this presentation this evening, talking about the history and the growth of the cemetery over the years. What I have here is one of the original deeds, or one of the first deeds issued by the cemetery. The date on this one is October 23rd, 1874. So it was a few years after the cemetery was founded. This one here was written for an Andrew McKee. And what I'd like to do is just read it to you, and this will tell you how the cemetery was founded. It says, "Know all men by these presents that the trustees of the Lakefield Cemetery, under the virtue of a conveyance bearing the date of the 16th day of November 1865, and made between Thomas Ray of the Township of Smith in the County of Peterborough and Province of Canada, yeoman of the first part, Mary Ann Ray, wife of the said party of the first part." Okay, so the first part then were the ones that originally owned the property, which was Thomas and Mary Ray. And you notice they're mentioned as yeomen on this. Yeoman basically just means that they were people that owned and cultivated a farm. So it was their original property then that they had to clear in order to cultivate it. What they sold to the cemetery, what they sold as the cemetery, was this here is Highway 507. This is facing west down there, north up here, east up here, north that way, south this way. I think. Anyway, this is Buckhorn Road. It's not Highway 507 anymore. I just want to confuse you. And the original 3 acres was this section here. That was the original 3 acres that they sold to the west. It's about 3 kilometers west of here. The intersection at County Road 18 and 507, they used to call that Ray's Corners. Ray's schoolhouse was there as well. And they also used to call this Ray's Cemetery for some unknown strange reason. It was never really officially called Ray's Cemetery, but it was referred to as Ray's Cemetery. So we carry on. It says, so we've talked about the first part. Now the second part is William C. Nichols of the Township of Durrell in the said County of Peterborough, Esquire. Okay, so William Nichols. William Nichols, he was actually one of the first settlers in the area around here. The fact that he has a thing there, Esquire. Esquire means that he was above a gentleman but below a knight. So he was a lawyer, a barrister, maybe somebody that's got some sort of educated merit that lets him put the Esquire after his name. So that's William Nichols, County Peter Esquire. John Sheeran of the same place, storekeeper. John Sheeran. He opened Lakefield's first general store in 1855 in the building that's now behind the Lakefield Clinic, across from Home Hardware. Uh, John Sheeran was also the treasurer of the cemetery, held the accounts. And these books over here are actually his handwritten ledgers that records all the financial activity of the cemetery. And then it carries on. Uh, John Sheeran, Edward Beatty of the same place, gentleman. Edward Beatty, gentleman. Gentleman, that means that good breeding. Someone of noble birth, superior social position. Edward Beatty must have had a head for figures because in 1874, when Lakefield was incorporated, he was the first auditor appointed for the village of Lakefield. Carries on. Edward Beatty, George R. Shield of the same place, blacksmith. George Shield, blacksmith, okay. Horse and buggy, he must have been a very busy man. But he was also one of the first 5 citizens that was elected to council in 1874 when Lakefield was incorporated. So he was a very civically minded individual. Next on the list is Isaac Garbett of said township of Smith, Esquire. Isaac Garbett, Esquire. He was the reeve of the township at that time as well. And then it ends off the other ones that were the Lakefield Cemetery trustees, Edward Sanderson of the same place, yeoman, and Lewis Davis of the same place, yeoman. So Lewis Davis and Edward Sanderson then were both silk farmers of the area. And then it continues here, and a resolution passed pursuant thereto in consideration of $17 paid to them by Andrew McKee. Do you know how many graves he got for $17? He got 16 graves. Now, you got to realize, at that point in time, $1 a day was considered wages, and if you worked with your horse, it was $1 for your horse too. So $2 a day. So he paid a week's wages for 16 graves. Believe in that? Even that deal. Okay, so anyway, Andrew McKee. Andrew was buried in this lot in 1893. He died at 76 years old. He was originally from Ireland, and on this deed, he's referred to as a yeoman as well. So he's again one of the original farmers, bearers of the area. Buried beside Andrew is his wife, Mary Ann. She died in 1911, 85 years of age. The burial registry indicates that she was born in Ontario and died in Lakefield. I thought that was interesting. So basically, these 7 individuals that I talked about before, these were the Lakefield Cemetery Board of Trustees. They weren't paid for what they did. Basically, they were entrusted with the management and care of the Lakefield Cemetery. Now, as each one of these individuals resigned from the board or passed down, what they did was they elected a replacement. And actually, that's how it continued down to our day. That's the way it's operated for the past 141 years. So, what did they accomplish? Well, going through the ledgers, it's interesting what you can see. It grew by the 1900s. It grew to 5 acres. They bought this little extra piece of property here beside here. So instead of being 3 acres, it grew into 5 acres. 1881, according to the records there, they purchased a wrought iron fence that is along the highway, and they planted maple trees. The receipt, I think, is 75 cents installed, guaranteed for a year. Okay, in 1882, in the center of the cemetery, here, a well was dug so that they could water flowers. And then in 1888, they erected a building over top of the well to be used as a tool shed. And they also built this building here, which is the vault, it's where they used to store the remains for burial in the spring before they did winter burials. The interesting thing about this building is the top floor actually has got a hole in it so that they could do the service, lower the casket down like a grave, and then they had racks in the basement where they would just store them. It was kind of ingenious. So that was 1888. 1905, they drafted a set of rules and regulations for the lot owners. And in the center of the cemetery, beside the pump house, they bought a windmill. And they put water lines through the whole cemetery so that they didn't have to go to the well to pick up water. They could just turn on the tap and get water. 1905. 1907, they made an agreement with Peterborough County to set aside this portion of the cemetery here for indigent burials, for people that couldn't afford burials. Maybe they'll talk a little more when we talk about Rosemere Manor, because that used to be called the House of Refuge. You guys are all historians, aren't you? You know, the interesting thing about this whole thing was during the 70s, welfare changed from the county to the municipality. So they didn't need this to use this property anymore. So they contacted us to see if we would buy it back from them. Anyway, here we have 30 years, over 30 years since the 70s that happened. And Peterborough County still holds title, still waiting for money for the property. Originally, they actually paid $3,000 for that property. There's about 30 burials in there, so that's $100 a burial. That's really that's what we would allow for care and maintenance to look after the property. So really, the money they pays to look after the graves that are there. There's no real money to be made. You see, from its beginning, what the cemetery did to someone like Andrew McKee is they used to send them a bill every year for annual upkeep. And the Board of Trustees, they hired laborers as required to care for the lots, to cut the grass. In 1913, however, James Hurl was hired as a regular caretaker. He was the first regular caretaker that was hired to look after the cemetery. And he resided in the house that is now at the north side of the property. And when he retired in 1927, it was given to Alfred Higgins. During the 20s, between 1928 and 1932, 7 acres over here was purchased to double the size of the cemetery to give it the 12 acres that it is today. And a new plan was drawn up, graves were marked out, and this became referred to as the old section, and this is the new section. Now they're both old sections. William Loist in 1945, he was the next caretaker that was hired, and he saw hydro come into the house in 1951. Can you imagine not having hydro up until that time? Of course, the interesting thing is he had a phone in before that. But the telephone lines were here before the hydro was here. And so in 1951, they brought in the hydro. In 1952, they hired a new caretaker, George Loist. George Quackenbush. Whenever they did improvements, they seemed to hire a new caretaker with the old and the new. In 1956, January 1st, 1956. Now we're coming up a little sooner here. Harry Hill, the village clerk of Lakefield, he was appointed secretary treasurer. In 1960, he was appointed secretary manager, and he actually looked after managing all the work done in the cemetery by the caretaker, and his job was also to keep the cemetery records. 1960. 1962, Stan Edwards was hired as caretaker. And 1974, Joan Edwards, his wife, was hired to look after the books instead of Harry Hill, to replace Harry Hill. And both Stan and Joan tended the cemetery until they retired in 1984, when my wife and I were hired to look after the cemetery. So we actually had the privilege of working with Stan and Joan, showing us the ropes. But it's hard to believe that it was 20 years ago that we started there. And one of the biggest changes that happened to the cemetery in the way it's operated was in 1930, when the cemetery changed from billing the lot owner annually to look after the lots to where they started to collect what's called permanent care. And now it's called care and maintenance. So that when a lot is purchased today, there is a portion of the fee that is set aside in trust, and it's the interest off of that trust that pays, that's placed into an irrevocable fund. The government of Ontario regulates this fund very closely. We need to account for all the money that we collect, uh, and we can use the interest generated from this only to offset operating costs. We're not allowed to touch any of the principal. So the types of investments that we can put our perpetual care funds into is regulated as well. Right now, we are limited to bonds and GIC. So you know what our interest rates are. We have about $250,000 in our trust fund, and we get less than $9,000 to look after all the cemetery right now. So obviously, that doesn't cut it. That really doesn't even cover the gas that we use to cut the grass. So we need to supplement this. So what do we do now? So we've gone from the past. Now we're into the present. We have a flower program where people purchase flower urns to go on the grave. We water them, look after them, plant them up. We sell monuments, markers. We arrange for inscriptions, even for other cemeteries in the area. We don't want to offer services like some cemeteries in the area to compete with funeral homes. We don't sell burial vaults. We don't sell caskets. We don't sell cremation urns. We don't offer funerals. We don't have a visitation center. We actually want to complement and work with the funeral homes to service everybody in the community. So together, we're actually helping the community instead of trying to compete with them. So we try to offer a variety of services for cremation, burial, and memorialization. I'm very pleased to say that we were the first cemetery in Peterborough County to have what's called a scattering garden. You see, there are people, when cremation takes place, who want the remains scattered instead of buried. Well, instead of doing it on your property or your home or some private place, we actually constructed this garden right here in the old part of the cemetery, which is here. Now, what this basically was, this was a rock outcropping, two big limestone things that came out. And basically, it was just a mound of earth, and you'd drive over with a lawnmower, and it's it was just a problem to look after. So one day I felt ambitious, went in with a backhoe, and I figured I'd just dig these rocks out. Well, you see how big they are? I mean, that was a few. So then, okay, I made a big mess. What are we gonna do? So we went and rented a power washer. We washed off the stones. Then we decided, well, this would make a real nice garden area, but why would we want a garden in the middle of the cemetery? And then we decided, well, we're going to make this into a place where people can scatter cremated remains. So basically what we've done is around the perimeter of these rocks, we placed bark mulch, the big chunks of bark. And basically what happens when somebody wants to scatter cremated remains, we just remove the bark mulch, put the remains right on top of the ground, put it back. Now, because multiple burials can take place under the same shrub or in the same spot, we don't mark the individual graves who's there. That's where we have this podium that's beside there, and we've actually put plaques on the podium name. Now, the nice thing about the podium is it also allows people to memorialize people that aren't even buried in the cemetery. You see, so it's a nice way to keep some sort of record for posterity when you don't really have the human remains present. Another thing that we've done is we've created a pond garden. You can see it here beside the columbarium. We went to the Belmont Rose Quarry in Havelock. The center boulder that we got actually got a hole up the middle of it, so we've got it like a squirting fountain. We put some statuary around it, so it's a nice serene setting. It's quiet, peaceful, and we've also got some lots, in-ground burial lots around there for those that wish that type of memorialization.
This is the old house.
No, this is right beside the house. This is right there.
Oh.
Right there. So as you come in the front gate here, you can see the rock structures that are right there. Another thing we've done over here in this area here is we've got the columbarium niches. It was interesting. One day we saw a deer walking through the cemetery, and I thought, now here is a photo opportunity. So I went and got my camera with my huge lens on it. It was back far enough away so I didn't disturb it, but I I used just about a whole roll of film on there. And then, of course, we take the best of the pictures, and that's what we use in our advertising. So basically, what it does is it promotes the idea we're a country cemetery, we're not a big city cemetery, and it's just nice to have the big trees and the natural surroundings. Anyway, in the old section here, the bedrock was actually too close to the surface to do full burials, so there was never burials done there for a foundation. It's great. So we put a cement foundation underneath these structures, and they're actually above ground structures for cremated remains. In this area here, instead of just putting a few burials, we've actually got one niche that can hold 32. The other one holds
The
60.
triangular one is 96 niches, the
Yeah.
other two are 64.
64 niches, 90, and each niche can hold 2 urns. So we're really using the space to the best of our ability, you see, that we've got. And the nice thing too about the cone niches, that because they're above ground, you can get it's like having a monument that's above ground and not have to find it in the wintertime. So that's what we have for cremation. Now, for those wishing traditional burial, what we've got is right here we've got some big blue spruce trees. Monster. They were planted a long time ago. So we've got this area here that we've designated prime real estate. A little more expensive, but not that much more expensive. But what we've done as well is we've also incorporated a parking lot here for those willing to visit. So that instead of pulling off the side of the road, you can actually pull in and you've got a place to park. Another thing that was developed, this area over here, to keep the park-like setting, they only allow flat markers. Flat marker only, don't allow the upright stones. Doesn't look like a cemetery, looks more like a park. We've also got an area between here where we've got what's called a shared monument section. What that is, you buy 2 graves on the west side, and somebody else unrelated buys the 2 graves on the east side, and you both share the cost of a monument. So if a monument is like $3,000, you pay $1,500, the other family pays $1,500, which means the lot, you actually save more money than you pay for the lots. So it's an option that some people are looking for. With cremation as well, some people like the traditional upright stone, but there's no point buying 2 full graves and an upright stone if you're only using it for cremation purposes. So we've got an area designated along here, where right along by the road, where you can have an upright stone on a single grave, but the size of the monuments are regulated so you're not so big that you're going to encroach on your neighbor's property. And we have plans in the works to create this is the existing cemetery. Actually, these dots, this is cool. In 1995, we had a master plan done. And to get this master plan done, we had an aerial photograph taken that was rendered down into CAD. And these are the monuments that were actually part of the photograph that's in CAD. So that's kind of interesting. This section here, this is a backfield. Right now, this is just field. There's nothing back here at this point in time. But we're looking at developing a pond, naturalized area over here for cremation. So for someone that's looking for something out of the ordinary, instead of the standard two graves upright stone, so you can have personalized memorialization in a bush. And then we will have the rest of the area will be divided up into adult grave-sized lots, and then of course there'll be cone bearing structures as it goes along. So as you can see, we're looking to the future, looking to see how burial trends are changing, what people are doing, so that we can actually adapt to the services that we offer the community. Instead of someone coming to us saying, some cemeteries are actually doing this. Somebody says, I want to use this lot for cremation. Well, you have to buy a full grave, and if you want upright stone, you have to buy 2 graves. So they're dictating how they want the property laid out. Whereas what we try to do is listen to what people want and then figure out how we can offer the services. As a matter of fact, this year, I'm proud to say, last fall, no, last March, we started operating our own crematorium. It's a state-of-the-art crematorium. The Ministry of the Environment is really concerned about the emissions from crematoriums, specifically mercury, the amalgam in the teeth getting into the air and pollution and all that stuff. So the Ministry of the Environment has got very, very stringent standards that are required for a columbarium, for a crematorium. And ours is the only one in the area, and I'm talking Peterborough, Lindsay, that has a continuing emission monitoring system where we actually have got a system set up that monitors the amount of oxygen and carbon monoxide going out the chimney, as well as recording all the temperatures to make sure that everything is all done within the ministry standards. And the beauty of this unit is it's all computer controlled. It's got PCL control on there. And this lets us have actually better control of the cremation process than other ones, because if we can detect the fact that there's too much carbon monoxide, then we know we turn off the burners and let it take place. So there's never a problem with smoke. And one of the things that we've done as well with our crematorium is we've developed a viewing room, so that if someone actually wants to witness the process, there's no secrets. If you want to see it, we've got it set up in comfortable surroundings. We've got pictures on the wall. We've got a sofa in there, and it's completely wheelchair accessible. Even the adjoining washroom is wheelchair accessible. And it's surprising how many actually, you don't think about it, want to see it, but it's amazing how many people are really just want to know what's going on and be there to finalize it. And I'm proud to say that we can offer it in a dignified manner. It's not just a hall with a door with a window in it. It's an actual room that's set up. Now, if anyone is interested, we do arrange tours of the facility when it's not in use. And anybody that wants to go through it, I'd be glad to show you what we have. Because there's no secrets. As a matter of fact, imagination is worse than reality. And if you know what's going on, it just makes sense. And one of the things we've been asked now that we offer this, that we have the crematorium, is can people prepay their cremation fee? And we've made arrangements with the Bank of Nova Scotia where we can actually take out a joint GIC in the name of the individual, and when the person dies, the GIC is cashed, and that pays for the cremation. And with the cost of propane and energy increasing, basically what you're doing is you're locking in the price at today's price, because I don't know what the price is going to be in the future. So I've talked a little bit about the cemetery, its growth, how we got to where we are today. Now, this talk that I've given, one of the areas that people seem to have the most interest in is cremation. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about cremation and what you need to know about the alternative way of doing things. One of the biggest changes in cemeteries over the last 20 years is that cemeteries are now an option. With cremation gaining popularity, cremated remains can end up in the garden around the house, at the cottage, at the hunting camp. In downtown Toronto, I heard of a woman who's had her husband scattered under a park bench by the bus stop, because that's where he used to sit and watch the world go by all the time. The most extreme case that I ever heard of happened down in Belleville. This is interesting. Two brothers carried out the wishes of their father, who requested that they organize their cremation without using a funeral director. Well, they'd done their homework, and it's legal to do this, perfectly legal to do this, but there was some roadblocks. The biggest problem was getting a copy of what's called Form 15, because you have to register the death, and you have to do this using Form 15. The funeral directors have it, but they're not easy to give up the form. No one would give it to them. They actually had to go to their local member of parliament to get this form. So they needed this form along with a doctor's statement of death to register the death and to get the burial permit. Well, then they completed the cremation application. They went down to the coroner and they had him sign the coroner's release form. They made a plywood casket that they physically put their father in, and put him in the back of the van and drove him to the crematorium and gave him the paperwork and said, look after it. So you see, the next of kin can handle it, but The fact is, death and mourning and dealing with the situation is a traumatic experience. And they had to go through a lot of extra stress, and they saved about $1,600. So, sometimes being practical isn't always isn't always the best route. You see, in Ontario, anyone offering the service of transporting someone that has died to the crematorium has to be licensed. And there's two different licenses that they have. One is a transfer service operator, and a transfer service operator, he's licensed to obtain the necessary documentation, place the deceased in an appropriate container, and transport the deceased from the place of death to the final disposition, which could be a cemetery for burial or a crematorium. This is referred to as direct disposition, to do the arrangements for the funeral and to conduct the funeral and to do all the necessary arrangements. You can find these services advertised in the yellow pages under funeral alternatives. And because you're not using the services of a funeral home and probably using a very modest casket or even a cardboard box, you can have considerable savings over going to a traditional funeral service. But funerals, on the other hand, they are usually arranged and conducted by licensed funeral directors. And what they do is they actually coordinate all the technical arrangements necessary with a funeral, and they also provide guidance in applying for all the benefit that you're legally entitled to. See, if you don't apply for your Canada pension, you don't get it. So you have to, and they've got all the forms necessary to do all that. They even have Form 15. So anyway, when most people plan a major purchase, what they do is they start off with the idea of what they want to accomplish. They check out the prices and the costs involved. They check out various vendors to see what's offered before they actually make the final purchase. But the trouble is, when it comes to making funeral arrangements, going through the same process can be very uncomfortable. And this is one of the reasons why it's good to do your homework in advance than when you actually need the service. So where can you get this information? Where can you find out information about funerals and stuff? Well, some can use the internet to view the services offered by the area funeral director and cemetery. But many hide their prices because they want a counselor to come out and personally talk to you. Because this way they can show you the prices and explain what they have to offer on a one-to-one basis. But you can use the websites to get an idea of what facilities that they do offer. And if you want, you can visit the facilities then, get your questions answered, and remember, you're always free to walk out. You don't need their services. You don't have to be pressured to anything. The Lakefield Cemetery website that was mentioned is I did that to answer questions about cemetery arrangements and about cremation as well. But there's also a price list, so you can use our website to actually see what costs are involved. There's many reasons why people decide to choose cremation with the wish to have their human remains scattered. They may want it placed in a garden at the home or woods or at the cottage. So if you're an executor and you get a direction that cremated remains are to be scattered, what do? What's the legal implications? How can you keep peace of mind with the family if some of the family are opposed to this? Well, first of all, is it legal? Well, once cremated remains are in the possession of the family, one of the options that they have is scattering the cremated remains, but they can do this on private land or public land. Private land, such as golf courses, hunting camps, cottage property, you need the permission of the property owner before you scatter someone's remains. Like you wouldn't want somebody to put somebody in your backyard without you knowing about it. So it just makes sense. Get permission if it's private land before you scatter cremated remains. Or public lands, such as Crown or Lakeland, you don't really need any special authorization because really, in Ontario, you're part owner of that anyway. So, cremated remains, what's involved with scattering? Well, let me show you. If you don't purchase an urn from your funeral director, this is what cremated remains come in, a black box like this. And it is kind of cumbersome to try to open up to get inside. So what we provide in our cemetery is if you use our scattering garden, we have an urn that is specifically designed for scattering. See, the lid basically just pops off, and you can scatter the remains and then put them on it in a dignified way. And the nice thing is by using our scattering garden, you don't have to pay for this. We let you use it at no extra cost. Now, okay, they want some at the cottage. Okay, his wish was to be scattered at the cottage. Well, the thing is you could still put the bulk of the remains in the cemetery, in the scattering garden, if that's what his wish is. That way you've got a record for posterity, because we'll go into our burial registry, go online, you can find out where it is. But you can take a little bit of the remains and put them in a keepsake or a temporary container like this. And you can put this little bit at the cottage, and this way everybody's happy. You see, so that's one option. There's so many things that people do with cremated remains. This is another little item. Some people find this disgusting, but they can actually take cremated remains and put them in a little piece of jewelry so that they can always carry a part around with you all the time. As a matter of fact, there is a place in the States, okay, cremated remains are carbon-based. So what they do is they actually take the cremated remains, put them under pressure, and make them into a diamond. So they will make you into a 1-carat diamond, and in the bottom of this diamond, they will actually laser etch your name and dates, okay? $5,000 is what this costs. But you get your choice. You're going to be a yellow diamond or a blue diamond. Now, the only problem that I have with this is when the diamond is formed, okay, then it has to be cut and polished. What do they do with the pieces that they cut and polish off the diamond? Scatter them? Or do they end up being in an abrasive? You know?
To be rather blunt, your average size adult, will it fill that urn?
200 cubic inches is your average. This will hold 200, but it depends on how big the individual is, you know, the bone structure, how tall they are.
Yeah. So it'd be that box full.
Yeah,
Some are a little less,
some
but they average
are,
about 5 pounds.
Okay.
yeah, some are half, some are quarters. It depends. It really varies. But well, the thing is, if there's more than that contains, then we just give you another container, which does like. Well, I'll talk about it later. Now, where was I? Attention. Okay, how to keep peace. If they're opposed to scattering, you can use that little keepsake. I've had some people in the cemetery, they get upset because they've got, they can't decide who gets someone who think you're in home, someone wants to bury. So what we'll do is we'll put some urn in one urn, take it home, and the other one will bury it, do what they want, and it's kind of keeps everybody happy. So, you know, there's a variety of options you can do. But, you know, if cremated remains do end up on a farm or a cottage, there are problems, okay? One of the biggest problems we run into, we've gotten phone calls over this, nobody has foresight to know what future development is going to take place. Cottages change ownership, farms change ownership. We had a gentleman phone us up, he was all upset because they're plowing where they buried grandma and grandpa. Well, they don't own the farm anymore. They don't have any right to say what happens, and he wants to know what he can do about it. Well, nothing. He doesn't own it anymore. Then there's a little thing called lack of disclosure. If you bury cremated remains at the cottage, and through change of ownership, somebody else buys that property and then finds out that somebody's buried on that property that they bought and they didn't know that, they can actually come after you for financial compensation because they weren't told that they were there, and they wouldn't have paid as much for the cottage at the time if they'd have known that. Okay, so there are problems. And I've also seen problems with families where, for example, the husband dies first, the wife ends up in a nursing home, and the wife wants to sell the cottage in order to be in the nursing home, but the children, they don't want mama to sell the cottage. You know, grandpa's buried there. And they don't really want to support grandma in the nursing home because when she goes, they're going to inherit the cottage anyway. You see, so this puts grandma in an awful lot of stress and having to make decisions where if they just didn't bury him at the cottage, it wouldn't be an issue. So these are all issues that you need to take into account. Placing the urn in a dedicated place in the cemetery is one way to be assured that the area is going to be developed into something else at some future time. They feel that cremated remains should have some sort of name and date to indicate who it is, and this is called memorialization. So, cremation. Should we talk about this in advance? Well, the thing is, the subject should definitely be brought up amongst the family because the one that has to handle the final affairs has to deal with everybody else. and if all of a sudden they're given this new concept that they're not familiar with, they're going to have a hard time when they have to deal with the death anyway. So it's a good idea that if cremation is one of the things that you're thinking about, talk about it, to tell somebody what your plans are, what you want done. And this way your wishes will be honored without any problems. So, consult together. Okay, so anyway, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you this evening about the cemetery and cremation and the growth over the time. One thing I would like you to do for me, okay? I'll be giving this talk or similar talks like this to other groups in the area. And I'd like to know how I did, you know, what you found boring, what you found interesting. So over here, I've got these forms. It says rate this presentation. So if you'd like, I'm not going to hand them out, okay? But if you'd like to afterward come out, just fill them out and give them to me. And at the same time, if you want any information about anything, there's a place there for you to write your name, phone number, how you want to get contacted. And we can do it on a personal basis if you want. We're not high pressure salespeople like some.
Who's on the present board and the chairman now of the cemetery?
Reg Northey is the chairman of the board. And there's Harry Pearson, Roger Charlton, and Roger Warboy. We don't want more than that because it's hard enough getting anything. The bigger the group, the less gets done. Yeah. Well, you have to understand, cemetery records are maintained by volunteers, okay? They basically weren't paid to look after the records. So the fact that they've missed a few years, that's understandable, especially the year. Yeah. Think of what things were like in 1928 around here, you know? 28 to 32. I mean, it was a hard time for a lot of people. What we did when we started working in the cemetery in 1984 was we started a program where we were actually comparing what was written down on the monuments to what's written down in that book. You know, it's kind of like doing a bank reconciliation that you hadn't done for 150 years. You know, to be honest with you, there's still a few names that we don't know where they are. And it comes back and haunts us because there are people that come and they want to be buried on their grandmother or grandfather or great-great-grandfather that they know is buried in the cemetery because it's on the website. But to be honest with you, we don't know where they're buried. Now, the advantage is the cemetery fills up chronologically. So if we know the date that they died, we can figure out where they are in the cemetery, kinda. You know, so we do the best we can with what we have to work with, and sometimes we're right. Hope most of the time we're right. But
percent of your guests are cremated versus buried?
when we first started there, we did about 80 burials a year, And if we did one cremation, that was the exception to the rule. Okay, last year we did, about 80, we did close to 80 burials, and of that, 40 were cremation. So we're up about 50% right now. Now Peterborough itself runs about 54% average, so we're running above average.
The story of the missing years,
I heard that, but I didn't want to repeat that. Yeah. Yes, sir. It, it's funny, you know, with the medical advances that we've had. People are still dying, you know, in 1887 here at 70, 84. But if you go down the list, you'll see there's 24, 30, 18, 14, 14. And these people died of pneumonia, inflammation, consumption. The guy that died at 84, you know what they have him dying of? Old age. But it like there was a Spanish influenza that went through the community in the early 1900s, you know, and that's all reflected in there. Back when they had the 16 grave plot, like Andrew bought here, basically they were farmers, but they also used that to bury their help. Okay, like if the Bernardo children came over and they had someone for the Bernardo children to work the farm with them, and they died in the course of their duties, then they were put on the family plot. And stillborn. So there was an awful lot of stillborn because the birthing was done at home most of the time, or the doctors that did it didn't understand the sanitary conditions that they have today. So as they become more educated, you can definitely see that in the burial registry.
Huh? Can you get closure without death certificate?
Closure, what do you mean closure?
Well, my sister died a few years ago. She from Mexico, Texas, and New York City.
So she spread around.
So it's spread around. And my parents are and their children don't really want any record. Some
We have a family from Austria that live in Innismore, and their parents were actually neighbors to the Von Trapps, and they wanted a place where they could actually come and memorialize their parents without having to go to Austria. So we actually have an area, the boulevard that's along here, where we actually have boulders set up for people to individually memorialize without even buying a grave. And the nice thing is, because there's no burials there, it's not really regulated by the ministry. If you can get the agreement of everyone that has the rights to use the stone. Okay, so in other words, you need the whole family to agree to
there's
doing
only
that.
two of us left, so I
Oh, well,
think-
if you get her okay, yeah, we can arrange that, get that done.
You can have a boulder.
Yeah, if you could do the boulder or put the name on the plaque as well, on the podium. That we have for the scattering garden. One of the names on our podium is actually, of one of the young ladies that was killed in that pig farm out in Alberta.
Yes.
It was the only way that there was nothing for the mother to bury, but she wanted something in memory of her child. So she had bought a small plaque and placed it on the podium.
And also a record. I think
And
there
it's a
should be a
record,
record
yes.
too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We don't get into too much detail other than saying who the individual was, who they're related to. Mary?
Michael was before me.
Okay, Mike,
In
sorry.
view of President's warnings about avian, is there?
The thing is, history repeats itself. You know, this is historian. Okay. Uh, the thing is we are due for another major influenza, historically speaking. Whether the avian flu is going to be part of it, or whether it's some other unknown, or you talk to people in the civic hospital, you know, there's diseases in there that are antibiotic resistant. You know, they just don't know how to treat them. You know, and if they ever become airborne strains, you know, the elderly and the young are going to be the two that are going to be affected the worst. You know, so but basically we can go through there and say yes, this is the people, this is what they died of. Another thing that we will find that you will find going through the registry, there's a lot of young women that died. Like I'm talking, you know, 20s, 30s after having 15 children. You know, I mean, well, yeah, it happened, you know. Back in those days, you know, they were looking at having a lot of children to help work with the farm. You know, uh, they didn't look upon parenting the same as we do nowadays, you know, where you're supposed to spend this quality time with your kids and not work with them anymore. The different values have changed over the years, you see. So, and again, this is all reflected in the Berry Registry for as attitude change as well. And Mary?
Yeah, I used to think the story of Australia,
Oh, the website, we get inquiries from around the world. Uh, People looking for genealogy research. We had a woman from Australia. She was tracing out her family tree and came across this name in our cemetery website. So I actually went down with digital camera, took a picture of the grave, and emailed it back to her. And she was amazed that halfway around the world, she could actually see the picture of her mother's grave. One of the other advantages of us having this website is some of the records are incomplete, and we get people that know the difference, and they can come in and give us the information. Now, I got to admit, I'm not as quickly as filling in the information as I should be, but I've got a record of it, so that next time because it's a lot of work to be able to put it in there. Because I had to do it in a form. See, if you get into fancy computer jargon, not all browsers support this. Like you can do pull down menus and auto searches and all this other stuff. But if you get someone that's got a very simple computer, you know, it doesn't work. So I try to make the website as easy to operate and as user friendly as I can, without it being overly complicated. See, a lot of programmers use technology for technology's sake. They're looking for the newest, the fastest, the best. You know, and they want to see this and that, and you know, colors and graphics. Well, when you get involved with colors and graphics, you're into speed. And if you get somebody that's got a dial-up internet connection, it's, you know, you can't wait for. It really frustrates me when I get onto a website and the welcoming logon takes more time to come in than I care to spend. You know, I just forget that. I'm there. I want to find out something, and then I want to go into something else. You know, forget the fancy stuff. Yeah.
Are cemeteries self-supporting financially? How are they funded, including the
Okay. Basically, the cemeteries come under the Ministry of Consumer and Commercial Relations. The Consumer Commercial Relations branch of government wants to be assured that the cemetery can, when it makes a contract with the consumer, that it can fulfill the contract. And they specify how everything is written and how it's done. But they don't care whether we got enough money to do all the stuff that they require done. When we originally started to decide to build a crematorium, one of the biggest problems that we had was obtaining the funding because being a not-for-profit organization, first of all, there's no government funding. Like, they won't guarantee any loans. Good luck trying to find money. So you're basically up on your own to try to do it. So through careful planning and getting some investors involved, we were able to get enough funding to actually build the project for the crematorium. But then the Ministry of the Environment stepped in and they didn't like this. We had to do another study, and that was another $5,000, and then they wanted this done. That was, I mean, they just treat money like it's water. It's I had one person tell me that they're trying to make businesses as broke as the government is. I don't know, maybe it's just, it's a very, I found, personally, I found it very frustrating, but at the same time, I found it very rewarding, because I'm able, dealing with the funeral homes and with the families, I can offer something that nobody else can in the area. When on Decoration Day, when I actually gave the tours of our crematorium, I had a woman in there that for 3 years that had bothered her. She had never had to experience cremation. Her brother died out west. He was cremated, and she had nightmares of the whole process that was going on. And when I was able to take her through and show her the whole facility and how everything's done with dignity and respect, and there's nothing really nightmarish about the whole thing that we do. It's not ghoulish. Finally, she had closure. She felt good. She could sleep at night. So just doing that, I get a certain amount of personal satisfaction out of it. But as far as the frustration involved with our finances, but then you have some other cemeteries that are looking for ways of generating income. So each cemetery is responsible to look after itself.
There's no public money.
Well, there's municipal cemeteries, and municipal cemeteries are run by the municipality, but we're not a municipal cemetery, so that doesn't affect us. A religious cemetery is supported by the church, by the churchyard, but at the same time, the churchyard can specify that only those where our denomination be buried in that cemetery. You see, so. But the church itself funds the maintenance and the upkeep of that cemetery, like St. Pete's, for example. Okay. Now some churches look upon cemeteries as an expense, and they just want to delegate it to somebody else. So as a result, the Catholic Diocese for Peterborough has designated area in the Lake Cemetery as Catholic, and so that's where they go instead of worrying about St. Pete's, more or less. And then they built that big arena to the west when they could have expanded the cemetery if they wanted to. Yeah, they've.
And Koreans and, I think they've got a Muslim section now too, but I'm not quite sure on that one.
See that we don't have that much ethnic diversity in Lakefield
Well, at Highland
at this point in time.
Park.
But the thing is, I can see in the future, people are going to retire up here eventually, and we're going to have to accommodate all sorts of different faiths. I mean, even right now, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant that we used to deal with, people aren't as religiously inclined anymore. They don't see. I mean, they want the tradition involved, but they don't want the conviction involved. You know what I mean? It's kind of an interesting conundrum. They phone us up and they want to know if we can recommend a minister, because they want a minister to use. So. Okay, we do what we can.
Peterborough need a private
Okay, how when a cemetery, like any business, needs its operating parameter, it has to set up how it runs. Okay. When Lakefield Cemetery Incorporated, we had letters of patent made up that actually set up when our meetings were, who the directors were, how the cemetery was run. And we are set up as a not-for-profit So we're not a charity, okay? We're non-charitable, we're not for profit. Lot owners cemetery. Little Lake is set up the same way. They're a not-for-profit, lot owners cemetery. Now, where Little Lake is getting into trouble at this point in time is by competing with the funeral home. They're in a different tax bracket. You see, if a funeral home was to build property on a lakefront, they would be paying taxes on the property, taxes on, municipal taxes. They're in a complete, as a corporation, they would also be paying taxes on their profit. Okay? As a cemetery, the land isn't taxed, the property isn't taxed. And so as a result, he can provide a service at a less price because he doesn't have the cost involved. When they were incorporated, well, when they started, back in 1850.
Dwayne,
That's right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. When you go Lakefield Denham Welfare, right on the corner there, that's a municipal cemetery. It's not used. It's but well, it's not really owned, but the municipality has got in charge of looking after it.
Our recreation park.
Whenever a cemetery becomes abandoned, so it's not going to be used anymore, it's the responsibility of the municipality to take over that property, so then it becomes a taxpayer's burden. So this is one of the reasons that municipalities don't really like cemeteries. See, the thing is, municipalities look upon cemeteries as parks and recreation, and parks and recreation really doesn't generate any income. You see. Whereas we, as a cemetery, try to make sure that we have enough money to cover our expenses. So this way we're a little more accountable. So, yeah.
Steve, Queenston, 15 years ago.
Okay, what happened? No. But see what happened back. What?
1992.
19. Wait for what year are we married? When were I kid born? Know what I mean? Okay, so hey, I'm being recorded. I got to watch what I say. Okay, 1992. A grave was being dug. An infant, a child of what, 9 years old, was
Four.
a four-year-old child was sitting on a headstone, watching this dig the grave. The headstone fell over and killed the child. Ministry, who's responsible? Family, who can we sue? Well, can you sue the person that made the headstone? Well, not really. Can you sue the people that are buried in the lot? No, you can't really. Can you sue the backhoe operator? Well, not really. So who's left holding the bag? The people that own the cemetery. People that run the cemetery. It's your responsibility to make sure that that stone was safe. So because of that court case, there are standards for monuments in the cemetery. They have to, if they're without a certain dye, they need to be tinned and doweled and cemented, and they can't be leaning. They have to be set up. Anyway, there's all these standards that they need to do, and they also wanted to set up a fund so that the cemetery has got money to caulk the stones and look after them and to maintain them. And this is called the Monument Care Fund. So now whenever a flat marker is sold or an upright stone is sold, we have to collect an amount that goes into our Monument Care Fund. And the interest from that fund is used to look after all the monuments in the cemetery. Now the problem is the stones today are paying for the grandfather problem. You see? And if the cemetery is abandoned, so it's not growing, then there's no money to look after those stones anymore. So although it may sound like a good idea, it really doesn't hold a lot of water. You take a place like Memorial Gardens where all the stones are flat. What do you need a care and maintenance fund for? You know, it's not a health, it's not a safety issue. You know, except if you trip with a hole, it's there with the doors, it should be raised, I don't know. So, but it's just it's just one of the things that the ministry has done to regulate cemetery, and how they operate, and we have to live within those standards.
I got it.
Delegating is always a good resort. I do it to my wife all the time. Any other questions? Yeah, well, I appreciate you, coming here anyway. The thing is by talking about cemeteries, cemetery property, cremation, you know, it saves a problem from when you have to deal with it, you know, by talking about it beforehand. And this way, one of life's most difficult situations to have to deal with can be handled before it has to be dealt with. Okay, so thank you very much.